right. Well, we'll talk about your trip in a bit, coming to the UK, etc.
Sure.
You've got a really busy schedule, and I appreciate you taking time out to just chat about your work, which I only discovered last year. It's absolutely fascinating. I've got your book here. I've just been refreshing on it, and it's quite unusual because it's quite a small book, but there's so much to take in, and I have to do it in small bites. There's a lot in there. I'm sure you could have made it a bit bigger, but it's like an introduction, isn't it? You're Holly Bridges, and you're now, at this moment in this recording, you're in Perth, Western Australia, right?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. And once again, thanks very much for taking time out and coming on. And but the first.
Pleasure.
So, Holly, can you tell us a bit about what the polyvagal nerve is, and how do you work with people in relation to the polyvagal nerve?
So it's, just to clarify for you, it's the polyvagal theory, and it's a theory by Dr. Stephen Porges, who's an American neurobiologist, and he's just made this beautiful theory to explain how the brain and the body talk to each other.
Yeah.
So we often think the brain runs everything by itself, but when you actually start breaking it down into neurophysiology and neurosensory systems, it's a constant communication. And so the vagus nerve is this very, very large nerve in our body, and it goes from our head into all of our major organs.
Yeah.
And it facilitates us being in a fight or flight state, or an immobilized state, or a calm parasympathetic state. And so it's easier with my funny stick figure pictures to explain this.
It's like a bundle of nerves. It's a concept, or is it actually real? Is it a real thing, or is it?
It's a real thing. It's very, very real. The theory is.
The theory is the fight or flight part of it, right?
Well, no. It does that as well. Probably more where people discern whether they approve of the theory or not. It's very well loved internationally, not just with autism, but with people working with trauma.
Yeah.
Because it explains. Porges' point is that the main point is that we go into an immobilized state, and that's an involuntary state.
Yeah.
So if the threat gets too big, either internal or external, like there's a lion too close, your body will shut you down.
Yeah.
And we've kind of forgotten that, and we don't really take that so seriously, because we don't live in the wilderness particularly. So he's explaining that, and it's very normal actually, but we've taken it out of our awareness and our paradigm. He talks about neuroception, which is a term he coined, which is how the body kind of takes in sensory information and processes it. So I don't generally I've got that in my book, but I don't generally get too bogged down with that, because I find people, if they need to get too technical about it all, then they get very cerebral, and then they get lost, and then they worry about whether they sound accurate, and the point gets missed, which for me is how I break it down in terms of people on the spectrum is that I think people are, and we pretty well know this anyway, people are stuck in a flight or fight state, and they find it very hard to, they get very overwhelmed because sort of their baseline is very high, and they never quite know how to bring it down, and so they get overwhelmed very easily, and then they disassociate and immobilize and whatever. But also they really often don't have a very good appreciation of their body state. They don't have very good interoceptive skills, what's going on in the body. And all of this for me is explained by the polyvagal theory. Okay. So what it's done is it's allowed me to discuss it in those terms. And so I'll have 15-year-old young men that come and see me, and I'll go, this is what the theory is. And I think, this is often what happens in autism, is your body just shuts down and then you can't access it. And, that's anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll go, oh, thank God, that actually explains me, because they know they're really smart. It's not, we sort of see it as this cognitive deficit, but actually it's more that when the brain's very malleable to the state of the nervous system. So when we're in a flight or fight state, our amygdalae literally grow bigger than our prefrontal cortex, which literally inhibits our access to our working memory, executive functioning, will to live. All of this stuff kind of gets turned right down, as well as all our sensory system. So for me, it's just a beautiful way of explaining it. And then it opens all these doors for how you might work with someone to facilitate strengthening their physical system, so that they can accommodate more and have a bit more capacity in a physiological state, I guess.
Okay, that's a nice overview. There's quite a lot of information, even at an overview. So yeah, I'm just wondering, as you were talking now, it's just a couple of things popped up for me, and one is if you could say firstly a bit about PTSD, because something I've learned about complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and autism, like it's an ongoing thing. That's what it means by complex. And the way that I know that autism is an environmentally influenced thing, but what about without getting too technical? I think we've got to keep it quite simple. But what about the pre-birth? I don't know what the term for that is, but the congenital condition in the brain that's supposed to, maybe there's effects from something the parents did, or it's genetic anyway. Well, the stronger theories are saying it's genetic. So does all this, like, if the preconditions are there, and then there's a little bit of PTSD either before or during or after birth, then is that kind of the baseline that your work kind of addresses?
Yes, it does address it, but I'll pull back to sort of where you were talking. There's a couple of things in there, and I find them really valuable to note when we're sort of talking about and working with people. One is, we actually don't know what autism is. We don't have a literal biomarker for it. There's no biomarker in the brain. We can say, oh, the brain's doing this or this, but the brain's a very fluid thing. It's actually a very quantum thing. And the other point is, when you take the vagus nerve polyvagal theory into account, you're looking at the entire system, not just the brain. So
that's really helpful, that, and I love the fact that you've brought in the fluid quantum. I've not heard those two words put together before. That means a lot to me, that, because study of the mind, when you're a subject, for example, is the obvious one. When you're a subject studying your own mind, how can you even, come out of your mind? And that's why stuff like mindfulness and, techniques like, are becoming more and more popular, even though these things have been around for since the beginning of time.
They have. The interesting thing for me about mindfulness is that it's really hard for people on the spectrum to do a lot, because their limbic system, their body state, is in such a high state, and it's hard for them to calm it down. And they often don't know what a really calm state is. That's actually what I teach. I teach how to get the body into a calm state, so it's a known state. And then you often, what happens is, people then get a clear mind. They have this experience of not having all this white noise in their head, and their eyes soften and all sorts of things happen. Yeah. So the mindfulness is very important, but a lot of people on the spectrum fail when they try and do the traditional things, because mindfulness is actually very much a body state. It's actually a very calm body state that then allows a peaceful mind. So what I like to facilitate is teaching the body how to come down and then still the mind, and then you go, see, that's what that feels like. And people are like, oh, that's actually quite easy. But it isn't if they have to think themselves to it. It's a harder trajectory. But it's wonderfully interesting because play with quantum understanding and fluidity and high order intelligence. People on the spectrum have all of those things. Their minds are wonderful, wonderful things. So it's why I find a lot of the traditional therapies very limiting, because they miss all of that beauty.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a whole different area to explore. And I noticed that it's really interesting, and I found myself when I'm talking about autism and they, because I had my diagnosis in 2014, and that was a really useful thing for me to have that perspective. I knew at the time what I was going to get into to an extent, and I knew when I got the diagnosis that it was a perspective, not the perspective. So when we say they, it's funny because I heard you consider yourself autistic as well, right?
I'm funny with language. I consider myself on the spectrum. Everyone has their own language. Yes.
And isn't language a bizarre and funny thing?
Yeah, it's huge. I've like you, I found it very illuminating to see myself from that perspective. I'm more compassionate to myself than I used to be. I'm a lot kinder. So it's afforded me a lot. What were you saying though?
About using they?
Oh yeah, it's language again, which is your thing, but it's hard when I'm languaging what I think about clients to say we. It really depends on the context of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When I work with people, it's we. So you say this is what happens to the body, etc. It's very much and then it's their body at the time, but I really normalize it because this is what people live with. But I do use they. I'm not particularly consistent with language. I'll use it and pick and choose it depending on what's needed, which is very annoying to some people because they like a accuracy or consistency. But I'm more consistent in my attunement to what is required at the time.
That's brilliant, and I align with that. And I've understood the limitations of the English language. And that's why I'm geeky about etymology as well. I suppose I've got on my list here that and I think we might have talked about this before, but I did a lot of qigong and different kinds of quite deep transpersonal, spiritual, if you like, kinds of training for years. And what I'm thinking is that all that qigong, which is a holistic technique, slow movement like Tai Chi, but very mindful at the same time. And every single time I do it, I get a big buzz out of it, and it's so simple. Do you think that might have affected my polyvagal nerve at all in this way?
What the language for that is vagal tone. What you're doing is promoting good vagal tone. So yes, Qigong and things like that are wonderful for that because they allow you to be more integrated with your body. And the whole point about vagal tone is it gives you choice, because when it's a little weak and wispy, it will drop out more quickly. And what we have as mammals is a facility, and all mammals can do this, where we learn to it's called our newer ventral vagus, but you learn to sort of have a consciousness about it. So reptiles and snakes don't, we do, and we learn how to work it and pull ourselves into a good space, or use our social system to engage whatever we need to do. But it's like driving a car. You learn how to operate your body in that sense. So all of the Qigong and those sort of martial arts, it's why equine therapy is very nice. Like all sorts of things that are sort of intuitive, as long as you're bringing awareness in, which is why Qigong's really nice, because it holds all of those aspects well. You're consciously engaging with your body system and strengthening it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Could you say something about a little bit? You touched on it at the beginning about science. We seem to be fixated on evidence, and it's kind of another paradigm altogether, isn't it? And it seems to be self-perpetuating. And I've been in academia. I did my postgrad certificate in autism last year, and I had to stop it there. And I think that here it's a very, very strong and it's a very strong academic scene, but there seems to be. Do you sense like a bit of a barrier to stuff that hasn't got the scientific proof and the strength of the papers and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's all of that. The trouble is it gets very circular when you're talking about autism, because the autistic advocates who are in academia really don't like the evidence-based practice. So, but then they're not open to anything new because it hasn't got any evidence behind it. So it's very catch-22. And at this point, they from my work, just don't know what to do with it, so they don't look at it. Whereas in the US and Canada, they're very familiar with it, so there's more ease. But yes, I think it's that, and it's just we're right at the cutting edge of it. Where we've been, it no longer works, and so there's 100 years of lovely evidence, but a lot of people, in terms of the applied behaviour analysis and where all of that, that's the basic kind of work we do with autism, and it has a lot of research behind it.
It's got a lot of funding behind it as well.
There's a huge amount of funding behind it, but it doesn't. It's the choice for therapists, it's the choice for psychologists, because that's what's practiced in universities and taught, etc. But you've got this entire tide of well-versed parents, people on the spectrum, everyone growing up and out of it, who don't like it. So it's a very, very interesting space to be in. And then you come in, like I will, because I can't help it, and bring something new to the table. People just don't quite know what to do with it. And I think we're still really working out where we sit with. We've moved into sort of autistic pride and all of the valuable things that are coming out of that, but it's holding a lot of space as well. So and then there's some people like my work doing some really interesting things, but it's with the body. And if you use language like healing or facilitating this or that, people get very edgy, because it starts taking them back into the fix-it realm, and they quite rightly mind that. So it's an interesting time to be sort of throwing everything up in the air.
Yeah, and yeah, I like the fact that in the dialogue work that I do, we use the term generative. We're creating the rules, we're creating the knowledge as we go along. But as soon as I find myself in that catch-22 in a way, because we haven't got any other language other than, I mean, to get it sustainable and to get it supported by our society, which is, and autism itself is largely deficit-based construct, whatever. But we have to call it a therapeutic intervention, and as soon as we call it therapy or intervention, then we get the warning signs. You can feel it. I don't want any interventions. I'm fine, thank you very much. And is there something wrong with me? I don't need therapy. So that's why for us, dialogue's like, it's a learning community. It's a practice in action.
You do.
Pardon?
That's why I love your work so much, because it holds space, and then it allows something new. And we need something new, because you can argue I'm fine the way I am, but there's a lot of comorbid stuff going on with people. There's very high suicide rates, there's high depression, there's high anxiety. It's actually crisis state, and the services that we've got don't touch the sides of it enough. I have people come and see me, and they'll be like 20, doing a double degree at uni, and go, I still can't talk to people, I'm really anxious, I'm really depressed, I can't go out, etc., etc. And I've been to all the top therapists, and they'll talk about the flight or fight system, but then they'll tell me how to calm myself down with my brain, and I can't do it, so I fail.
Yeah.
So missing something still, even though we're being kinder about it. We're not using deficit language so much, but we're still using the old therapeutic system, and it doesn't work. So
It is outdated. Yeah, it feels like an old archaic system. And I remember uni last year saying, so what happens to this knowledge that all these theories? How does it get into the public domain? And how am I going to work with autistic people if I've got if I manage to do the critique and everything? Well, the answer was, well, if you present a paper that's strong enough, it gets fed through into the the political system. The what, sorry?
When? Yeah, like it can take another 80 years.
When, of course,
and
yeah.
still has to pick up and make sense of it.
So
when I first started, I had people.
Yeah. Somebody has to read some key person has to read a key paper, and a lot of it's to chance, years later, and it might get through all the different board meetings and finally become an act. And I've been in the autism partnership boards around here, and some people have left because when I joined 2 years ago, there were people there who've left saying, well, we're still discussing the same things as we were 10 years ago, and we're still talking about the Autism Act. And it's a really tough one, isn't it?
Yeah. When I first started, because I got so excited that I had to write the book, I just kept following my piece of string. Yeah. I can't help it. But I started, well, I went and worked in autism services, but people went, well, why don't you go and do a PhD to prove that it works? Yeah. And all I could think was, that is not going to prove anything. That is just going to take me down a certain academic rabbit hole. And the follow through is what you just said, and nothing would actually have been achieved. Yeah. And I think the audacity of my work and the beauty of it is that I don't work for an organization, and I'm not under the umbrella of a university, so I can create. And I get in a lot of trouble for it because it's not evidence-based. But how do you go somewhere new if you don't develop something first and then look back at it and then apply some research methodology to it? I'd love someone. I keep trying to get people to take it on board now and do some research. It's very, very hard to do because of the lineage of what people will pay for with evidence-based practice, etc. But you can't go somewhere new if you already know where you're going. And academics don't support newness. They don't. That's not their function, which is a shame.
But we're not saying, we're not, as pioneers, if I may humbly use that term, we're not saying, I mean we may be fools as well, but we're trying something. We're in action, right? So we're not throwing out the academic side, because this is our society, and there's a lot to be gained from using evidence and research. Yes. It's a means to an end. There's not enough applied research, and there's not enough funding going into strengths-based initiatives, and it's mostly going into the medical realm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's coming. I think there's more discussion around the fact that we don't do enough wider research, and I think we're, as a society and as a world society, we're kind of getting used to that. We're starting to appreciate the intuitive. Yeah. Be able to measure it better. Our neuroscience has allowed us to appreciate what's happening in the body and how it influences the mind. Like, body therapists have known for years that the immune system's in the brain intuitively, but now they've measured, they can track it, and 80 to 90% of our immune system is in the gut, and then it's also in the brain, and then that helps clean the brain. And we only thought there was basically blood cells clean the brain, and now we've found there's sort of 3 methods. And so there's all this intricacy of the body that we're getting more sophisticated about understanding, which means that we're a little bit more open to then pushing the frontiers. But it's evolution as much as anything. It's a fun time to be alive.
It is, but I'm laughing because I'm thinking, we're discovering, oh, there's more than red blood cells that clean the brain, but going back to qigong again, that's at least 5,000 years old. The qi energy is we're really kind of, I mean, we call it Western. I don't know whether you're classed as Western, but it's just so, we're just so kind of polarized in some ways, aren't we?
Yes. I think we've been in love with science for a long time, and science is limited, and there's truth, and that's different. It's like it's only truth if science says so, but science is very limited. It actually doesn't fit. There's wider truths, the whole qigong thing, and for me, at the end of a session, I'll go, how do you feel, and what is that for you? And for me, that's the measure. Does the person actually feel fuller, better? You can measure that scientifically, but I wouldn't do the work if I didn't see some beauty before me. Yeah. And that's harder to measure as well.
Yeah. Okay, so it obviously really fascinating, and we've done half an hour already, and we've only just skimmed the surface. So I think we'll draw to a close in the next few minutes if that's okay. But obviously there'll be other opportunities to chat, hopefully. I remember we had you gave me an introductory session on Skype last year, and it got me to get the fit ball, the big ball, and I was lying on my back doing that pressing exercise and everything. And I'm pretty sure that when I stood up, I felt an instant. It was a high, but it wasn't the same as a qigong high. There was something slightly different about it. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, about the practice.
I'm more interested, I guess, in. It's really interesting for me to tease out what that difference is. Like that's the fun thing for me. Like it's helping people to find more and more calm states in their body. So it fascinates, and that's how I work out what my work is and what it's doing. But you understand a qigong state really well, and yet it's different. And so it's almost more interesting for me for you to, when you might not be able to describe that difference and what it affords you. It's really interesting. So can you articulate the difference?
Yeah, I think after a qigong session, I feel like I could do some flying kicks. I could go for a run. I feel energized. I feel like there's kind of explosive energy. But the practice that you guided me through, there was kind of like I can only describe it in the color white. It was like a clean sensation, a clean white feeling. That's all I can describe it as. It was like the air was slightly fresher.
Yeah. So physiologically, I think what happens is that when we're in a flight or fight state, our vagus nerve seizes the gut because you don't need to be digesting food when you're running, etc.
Yeah.
What it does is it lessens that, and it allows us an engagement with the enteric nervous system, which is, coming very much back to Chinese kind of stuff. But the enteric nervous system actually is our whole gut sense, and when it's eased, it allows good serotonin and dopamine balance, and it also calms the 80% of our sensory information actually is absorbed and assessed in the gut, and it sends messages to the brain. So when you soothe here, you stop getting all of this information pinging up, which gives you it gives you a state of grace. So I like the Japanese term hara for it, because it's a holy, graceful place, and the enteric nervous system operates on its own when it can. It's a state of great wellness and restoration, but it's a just because state. It's not we're going to go and do this now, or we're going to learn this. It's actually just because I feel really nice, and my head's clear, and my eyes can soften, and my ears can soften, and I can experience myself just because. And I think it's a very underappreciated state because we're so Western. We're always being functional. But if you can find that place and you generate wellness, and then you can come from there more often. But it's peace. So can I just say this, because I had this really interesting time at a workshop recently. One of the ladies had PTSD. She didn't have autism, but she's been a policewoman, and she's had really chronic PTSD. One session with that ball in the middle of a workshop, and she was serene. And she just went, I haven't felt this for 20 years or something. It just gave her this place. And then the body remembers. So it's something that you can go back to more easily, whereas you forget it. Or I think if people have been born or not long after in a state of high arousal, high tension, whatever it is, they don't even know what that thing is. They don't know what that place is. So what I do is educate them. And it takes quite a bit because their safety is on being in high alert, and the body doesn't trust this other thing. So you have to gently educate it till it knows. Whereas you, because you've done so much Qigong work, are more familiar with that state, and yet it's interestingly a little bit different.
And I've been fortunate enough to experience states years ago, and I'm saying this because recently I've forgotten, but I've just been dimly aware that there's something missing, and it's the feeling you get when it's that high when I've been on a walk in the countryside and I come back and there's something different, or I've done some fasting and there's something different about my consciousness. And consciousness is the purest thing that we know of, and so that's why it's such a paradox. When we're not conscious, we don't miss it, or if you know what I mean, when we're less conscious, we don't miss a higher conscious. It's hard to describe in those terms.
It is. You really can only access that state of, it's a state of being. You can only access it well when your body's in a good place. And I think we've forgotten that. So because we so love the highly sympathetic limbic state where you're being conscious, cognitive. But cognitive, conscious, they're very different places, aren't they? And as you say, when you're in this one, you actually forget, because literally your wiring shifts, your vestibular system shifts, and your amygdala they're up. So your whole physiology has a certain truth, and you get stuck there.
Yeah. Well, let's try and remember more about that.
Yeah. Well, I think your work does that. I think that's why your work's so lovely, because it allows people to be in that state and then share, which is very rare. It's a very beautiful thing that you do.
Thanks. I mean, I hope that people are, they do experience, but there are some reports that it's not a complete waste of time. This year's program starts on Friday actually, and we've got Carolyn Pickels joining me, and she's a person that works to some degree. I don't know much about her work, but she's told me that she works to some degree with the body, so that's going to be interesting. I don't think we're going to be doing, we had a laugh about this on the other interview, I don't think we're doing body work on day one, maybe not at all, but because it's up to the group anyway. But it's going to be really interesting to keep this knowledge going. Can I just ask you one last thing before we wind up? I've got a bunch of questions here. I'm going to pick one. Can you tell us one of your weaknesses? It's just a personal thing, doesn't have to be deep.
I swear a lot when I get close. I get Tourette's or close.
Okay.
So it's really interesting with, like, we talk about states of consciousness and serenity. The whole point for me with the vagus nerve and the vagal tone is not always to be at your best, because you can't, and so I did a talk in San Francisco, and last year ago or so, to a bunch of adult autistics, and this guy at the end of it went, well, you're not particularly serene, so you're not a very good role model for your work. And I went, good point. But I said I've never been to America before. I've never been here before. My daughter's in Spain and they just had a terrorist attack, and I'm actually pretty fried. The point is not always to be in a really good place. The point is that you develop facilities so you can go up and down all of that. I have a line. It's like, you know, you can go into all of those states. The vagus nerve allows you to be in all of those places, but the point is not to always be calm, because you might have a lion. You need to be able to deal with it.
I think I'll take that as a weakness then, even though you backed it up with loads of excellent.
It's still a weakness. I swear like a train. There we go.
All right, Holly.
Oh, can I just say though, I am going to be in London.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to be in Cork in Ireland on the 5th and 6th and 7th, running a 2 and or 3 day workshop for PCPSI, and then I will be in London after that running a 2-day workshop, and I'm doing some intensives one-on-one with people if they want to, and that's going to be in Hammersmith and in Fulham. So if people want to access that, they can contact me via my website, which is www.zebr.co. But I'm really looking forward to it. I think I think people are starting to get familiar with my work, and so it'll start sort of generating nicely. And thank you for having me on.
You're most welcome. I think that things, even since last time we spoke, things seem to be moving on, and I really hope they are. And I wish you all the best with it, and have a fantastic tour, and have a lovely evening in Australia.
Thank you. You have a beautiful day. See you soon.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.